Oh, I see my presentation isn't working. Yes. Okay, first I'll say a few words about why I chose this topic, and then who was Neil Gunn, or Neil M. Gunn, about the 3 historical novels. I'm going to give a short definition of characterization and symbolism, and then I'll talk about the 3 novels separately, for each of them with a summary. Then I'll pick 2 characters out of the novel and 2 symbols, and also say a few words about why I think these novels are worth reading. And I'll end with the conclusions which I wrote in my master's thesis in 1986. So I studied at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland, that's the picture on the right, at Lake Geneva. And I wanted to go to Scotland. I was very interested in Scotland. And I wanted to write something about a Scottish writer. So I started reading books in our library about Scottish literature, and I found that Neil Gunn was very interesting. I loved his interest for spirituality and for nature, which are 2 themes which I'm also very interested in. Neil Gunn was born in Caithness, that's in the northeastern part of Scotland. And his birthplace is Dunbeath. It's a small village at the sea. And in the picture in the middle, you can see a monument which is in Dunbeath, and it's representing a boy carrying a salmon. And this is a scene of Highland River, which some of you may have read. So who was Neil Gunn? He was born in 1891 in Dunbeath, as I said. His father was a skipper, his mother a domestic servant, and Neil was the 7th of 9 children. He attended Dunbeath School from 1896 to 1904, and then he went to live with his sister in Kirkcudbrightshire and was taught by a private teacher. And in 1911, when he was 15, he joined the civil service. And he worked in London for a few years, and then was transferred to Edinburgh. He trained in customs and excise before being appointed excise officer in Inverness in 1923, working all through the Highlands and getting to know all distilleries in Scotland. In 1921, he met his wife, Daisy, or Jessie Dallas-Frew, and throughout this period, he was writing in his spare time. His first novel was published in 1926. It was called The Grey Coast. In 1931, Morning Tide. 1933, Sun Circle, which is one of the historical novels, and 1934, Butcher's Broom. And then in 1937, Highland River. And Highland River was a very successful novel, so successful that Neil Gunn decided to stop working as an excise officer and to focus full-time on writing. And the first thing he did after he quit his job was to buy a boat and to travel with his wife for 2 months, I think, along the coast. After that, he wrote many other books, and in 1948, he received an honorary degree of Doctor of Laws from Edinburgh University. His wife died in 1963, and Neil was very devastated after his wife died, and he stopped writing. He died 10 years later on the 15th of January 1973, aged 81. So these are the 20 novels which Neil Gunn wrote. it irritates me that I see on the right side Reading Scotland recording. I don't know if I can switch it off. No, I can't. Okay.
You should be able to switch it off if you get a focal point. If you just focus on this, if you press on the 3 buttons, die weiteren Aktionen there.
Okay.
I think it can be. Is it possible to do it that way?
No.
Okay, try another one.
Oh, I've got it. Okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, the last novel was published in 1954, The Other Landscape. And he also wrote short stories and essays and autobiography. He wrote a book about his voyage on a boat with his wife, about which I talked a few minutes ago. And he also wrote a book about whiskey and Scotland, which may be famous, which some of you may have read. And these are the 3 historical novels he wrote. Sun Circle in 1933, and these are very thick books with 391 pages. Then Butcher's Broom, 1934, 429 pages, and The Silver Darlings, 584 pages. These 3 novels have in common the fact of being the writer's only historical novels and belonging to his early period of writing. And all 3 are set in a place not unlike Neil Gunn's birthplace, Dunbeath, and portray a Scottish community at a time of transition as a result from historical causes. Sun Circle is about a Pictish village in the 9th century, experiencing a Viking raid. And the characters in the novel are just discovering the Christian religion, and we see how their traditional values begin to decay. And in this novel, the community's whole organization is destroyed through the loss of its leaders. Butcher's Broom deals with the Highland clearances, in which crofters were evicted by their landlords to give place to sheep, and had either to make a living in the barren setting of the coast or to emigrate. The time span of the novel is 14 years from 1799 to 1813. And Butcher's Broom is the name of a plant, which you can see on the picture. It's the bottom of the page. And The Silver Darlings is about the herring boom in the North Sea and the changes brought by this new wealth to the very people who had been driven away by the clearances. Therefore, I can say that the characters of this novel can be seen as the children of the characters of Butcher's Broom. The time span of The Silver Darlings is from 1815 till 1837. What is characterization? Characterization is the representation of the traits, motives, and psychology of a character in a narrative. Characterization may occur through direct description, in which the character's qualities are described by a narrator, another character, or by the character himself or herself. It may also occur indirectly, in which the character's qualities are revealed by his or her actions, thoughts, or in a dialogue. And symbolism is a literary device in which a writer uses one thing, usually a physical object or phenomenon, to represent something more abstract. The strong symbol usually shares a set of key characteristics with whatever it is meant to symbolize, or is related to it in some way. And characters and events can also be symbolic. And Neil Gunn himself wrote in The Silver Darlings, I quote, "As though nothing profound is ever finally and materially clear, but only glimpsed in its symbols." So he was very well aware of the strength of symbols. Let us now come to the first historical novel, Sun Circle. Here is a short summary. In this novel, Gunn moves back to the Dark Ages, where the Vikings were raiding the coast of Scotland. The story focuses on a Scottish small tribe, subsisting mainly on agriculture. They have a central encampment with a stone tower where they can shelter when they are raided by the Vikings. But apart from that, they live a very mundane existence. The heroine is Britta, the hero Aniel. Aniel thinks he loves Nessa, the daughter of the chief, but we know he really loves Britta, even though it is going to take him the whole book to find that out. We've been forewarned that the Vikings are going to turn up, and of course, they do. They slaughter many of the adult males, enslave a few, and do the usual destruction bit, though Gunn does at least give us their point of view. Aniel, Britta, and a few others manage to escape to the woods, ready to start up again. There they capture a Viking chief who is about to rape a not unwilling Nessa, and Nessa and the chief pay the price. The Vikings go, and we are all ready to start over. The summary is not from myself, but I found it on the web modernnovel.org. And the two main characters are Aniel, is the novel's main male character, 20 years old, is described as slim-bodied and dark, and is the pupil of the druidic master. And this makes him very different from the other boys of his age. He likes to sculpt and to paint, and he has elected Britta, a young girl, as worthy of seeing his works of art. And he also likes to tease her and to frighten her, childishly, in a mixture of boldness and shyness. And he also feels attracted to Nessa, the golden-haired daughter of the chief. Aniel is interested in spirituality, is eager to learn from the master, and is described as having a vision of the newly introduced sun god. He is so fascinated by this sun god that he wants to paint him. And is also fascinated by the Christian priest Morua's words about Christ. Fascinated and troubled. He's open-minded and able to grasp at once the meaning of what happens. The novel shows his coming of age. During the Viking raid, he must not only cope with his father's death, but something extraordinary happens to him. I quote, "That a youth should kill a man and win a woman, his first man and his first woman, all in a morning, is something for his legs to put into their stride and for his head to balance." The love story between Aniel and Britta begins in the turmoil after the massacre and counterbalances the surrounding horror. Aniel grows into the function of a priest and temporarily of a leader. He struggles with his emotions, is not sure what his vocation is, has even thoughts of sacrificing Britta, and almost betrays his companions for the sake of Nessa. Finally, he finds his peace of mind in the middle of destruction. I quote, "Each man was a lonely being in that battle. He had to hold the gods and demons at bay by propitiation, by sacrifice, but even more by the strength within himself. Let him be as one in his circle." And now we come to Britta, the main female character. She's small and dark, a Pictish type. Although she is already 19 at the beginning of the novel, she appears as a girl whose woman's body is just awakening. The searching hands and mouth of the baby she is looking after leave her troubled. She discovers that she's not indifferent to Aniel. He haunts her thoughts, and she gets pale at the mention of his name. At first she's frightened by him, for he not only represents to her the unknown world of man, but he's also the master's disciple, someone in touch with the dark forces, which he even tries to defy by making representations of them. And Britta also feels attracted to Leo, whose pipe has an enchanting power. From the moment she appears in the book, she goes through all kinds of emotions caused by a meeting with the master and then with Aniol, by the rumor of the Vikings landing, by Granny Beg's stories, by Leo's music, and by the terrifying wilderness. And the sum of these leaves her in a state of elation and physical excitement that makes her surrender to the embrace of a figure in the dark, in the midsummer's night. Britta was born in the wilderness and, in some way, belongs to it, as the following quotation shows. She, Britta, had always feared the forest and the moor places, but she knew too that in desperation she could give herself to them, whatever that might mean of terror in the beginning. When she meets Aniol again, just after he has saved her from the Viking, she can at last feel at ease with him, because he has lost all mannerism and shyness. Their love can flow freely and be consummated. And the next important moment for Britta in the novel is the one preceding her would-be sacrifice. In front of the gathered crowd, she finds it impossible to rebel, and her love is mixed with religious feelings for one man, their priest, her priest. As she accepts her fate, she is able to transcend herself and see herself as the bearer of her people's hopes. Quotation, she was now not herself but someone else, or rather she was herself in a legend. Her life will be saved by the fire put by the Vikings. From then on, her role becomes less central until she is reunited to Aniol at the end of the novel. And now let's examine two symbols in Sun Circle. The first one is light. Traditionally, light is a symbol of purity, morality, and knowledge. Sun Circle deals with a primitive culture in which the sun is an object of adoration and wonder, as well as a vital element. A light versus darkness opposition exists between the characters of the novel. Most of them in the community are small and dark. Only a few are tall and fair-haired, and these are in the positions of leaders. Trust, the golden trust, the splendid one, is the chief. His wife, Silis, their daughter, Nessa, from whom emanates, I quote, a brighter light than the sight was accustomed to, end of quotation. And of course the Viking leader Hakon, whose eyebrows and eyelashes the sunlight turned to a fine golden transparency. These four people with whom the sunlight can play do not belong to the same category as the others. They do not belong to the earth, as the dark-haired common people do. To Aniol, both Nessa and the sun god Apollo represent a temptation, the temptation of vanity of the man-god. As he feels attracted to Nessa, he also feels attracted to this new god. I quote, and one day, in an awful secrecy, he had tried to draw the sun god. For this purpose, he had made colors ever more bright, especially one luminous yellow. Fire is another aspect of light, with its destructive potential. And fire and the sun are attributes of the almighty sky god. They symbolize man's craving for something higher, which oscillates between the temptation of the man god and Christianity. By choosing Britta instead of Nessa, Aniol will be reminded of darkness, the darkness of his own people, of the forest, of the earth, and of the small gods who can be dangerous if neglected. The light versus darkness opposition appears throughout the novel and allows the reader to enter the spiritual universe of 9th century people. And the other symbol I've picked out is the circle. Of course, it's entitled in the book's title. The circle is traditionally a figure of perfection, all its points being at the same distance from its center. It is a closed figure without end or beginning. In some circles, the circle is used to give an image of man's identity as something that circumscribes the self, and within which the self is impregnable. It first appears in the novel when a character needs protection. I quote, "Footsteps put a circle 3 times round the house, a sun-wise circle of soft padding sound. Britta lay at its core, curled in a circle of her own." But it has a dark counterpart in the novel again. At one point, Aniel and Britta meet a circle of dark men, out of which a collective will emanates, which is then transferred to Aniel's mind. I quote, "Britta and Aniel stood within the pale rim of the circle, behind them the small dark figures of the Finlags. No one greeted them, no one moved, and yet it was as if the ring opened to them. Aniel stood looking from body to body. What had been on his tongue went from it. The dark circle was round him like a band about his forehead, making him stare." And the circle is at the core of the master's teachings, as seen in this quotation. That was all the master's teaching in the end, to see clearly. The sun at the center of his circle, and the moon was at the center of her circle. The moons that had her own moon seasons, governing the tides of fertility, not only in the sea. As the sun put a circle around the earth and all that it contained, so a man by his vision put a circle around himself. At the center of this circle, his spirit sat, and at the center of his spirit was a serenity, forever watchful. Now, why is Sun Circle worth reading? For me, the novel is a convincing reconstruction of life in the village community with its music and storytelling. And I've chosen a quotation illustrating this. "In the natural play of their minds, they are an affectionate people, desiring peace rather than strife. They are a dark, intricate people, loving music and fun, and it is a mark of them that an old man will play with a child, and the old man will pretend to be defeated by the child, for their pretenses come naturally to them, and twist into many games. Out of their pretenses they make stories, strange stories that hold the child's wonder and so hold their own." End of quotation. It's also a reconstruction of the groups of people who clash with each other. The dark-haired Picts, the fair-haired, I think they are Scots, I'm not sure, and the more ancient tribe of the Finlags, which are still shorter and darker, and the invaders, the Vikings. It's also a reconstruction of the mind of 9th century people who have a mythical consciousness and see, for example, nature as animated. And it is a reconstruction of the transition of religion from animism to Christianity, with many different stages in between. Furthermore, it is a suspense-packed story in which the tension rises until the Vikings arrive and then depart. And this suspense is often achieved through the limited perspective of one character. Finally, the novel is beautifully written. in a very poetical language, as shown, for example, in the opening lines, which I now quote. At the 3rd hour after noon, the sun was still asleep in the summer sky. The moors and forests of the Northland lay under it, and in glittering barren places the heat wavered and danced, turning veins of quartz to veins of fire. Beyond the mainland, the blue of the sea was more intense than the blue of the sky, and the islands of the Orcades lay at anchor like fabled ships. Long shapes with keen prows to the west, with sheer sides, not riding the sea but crouching to it, with that odd menace which, like tenderness, is forever at the heart of strength. End of quotation. And now we are going to examine the second book, Butcher's Broom, and here is a short summary. The book opens on Dark Mary, a local healer and widow, making her way back to the strath where she, her grandson Davy, and Ellie, a young woman from the community, live. They live on the Riascan estate, where they have lived for many years under the ancient clan system. The decline of the clan system is one of the catalysts that drives the clearances and the plot of the novel. Ellie falls in love with Colin, a young man in the community, and falls pregnant to him, just as he leaves to go to fight in the Napoleonic Wars for a regiment raised by the local captain, who, as a taxman, emigrates, leaving his community lacking the protection he once provided. Ellie wanders the lowlands, destitute with a child, but returns to the community an outcast, just as the threat of clearance hangs over the whole strath. This is carried out by a thinly veiled equivalent of Patrick Seller, a historical figure, called Heller. Through this all, young Davy struggles to regain his trust for Ellie, and Ellie also attracts the attentions of Rob the Miller, who eventually marries her. The community is burned out and cleared to the rocky shore, with a wall erected to stop them using their old lands. They eke out a pitiful existence in a harsh environment. Mary is killed at the end by an estate sheepdog. Colin returns from the war to find his community relocated and overtly changed. He encounters there Ellie's son, Colin, and together, although not recognizing each other as father and son, they bury Mary, according to custom. And one of the main characters in the novel is Mary. She can be considered as the main character, but she's no typical heroine because of her primitive, unwavering, archetypal qualities. I quote, "She was rather like a little woman from the hills, from any of the small inland glens, and her kind was not uncommon, even in townships near the sea. Only Mary seemed to have in her an older knowledge than was common to the rest of her ancient kind in these places." Another quote, "Dark Mary was like a bit of the earth that was given hands and eyes, that took from the earth and the edges of the sea, healing weeds and herbs. Dark Mary of the shore. No one thought of her as a witch, yet there was an odd, half-hinted, half-jocular conception of her as a being that went in and out of the earth, as a dark sea beast can go out and in the caves of the ocean. A shadow was sometimes seen when she wasn't there herself, and often a still face frightened boys in the wood. Her knowledge about herbs and medicines is precious to the community. She goes on errands to heal people and does them good by making them talk. She's even able to prepare a filter to cure Ellie's new sterility. She bears in herself a treasure of legends, songs, and rhymes, which come from very old times and have a soothing effect on the people who listen to them. And she has no relationship to money, saying, for example, "They are pretty to look at," as Anna gives her the coins Colin had sent from the war. Unlike most of the displaced people in the novel, she is not afraid to go back to the old village to gather plants and lichens. In a very impressive scene at the end of the novel, all the lambs which have been separated from their mothers gather bleating around her, attracting the shepherd's attention, who then sets his dogs on Mary. And the other character I've picked out is Ellie. She's one of the most loving of Gunn's women characters. She's all softness. I quote, "Ellie's breasts were soft and full, her shoulders tilted upward or drooped, her body had a flowing movement that would come at one with an intimate, wheedling voice, wanting the fun of breaking away into pieces of teased laughter." She and her boyfriend Colin meet in a secret place and enjoy a perfect love, until he announces his departure to the wars. She does not protest, and she is able to understand him. He would like to go, the deep craving in a boy's breast to do what other boys are doing. To hide her pregnancy, she travels to the south with 3 other girls as harvest helpers. A tinker woman helps her to survive. Ellie has a very tough time, living in poverty and having to defend herself against the lust of men. When she comes back to the village, her face still looks soft behind her misery. The warmth of some inhabitants of the Riascan gives her some confidence back. But here too men crave for her body, like Rob the Miller and even young Davy. Because of that, she was certain she carried a curse. She becomes detached from herself, possibly beyond disappointment. She eventually agrees to marry the intemperate Rob. In her married life, she lets herself fall away into complete self-abnegation. Her husband gets estranged from her because she cannot give him a child, and she becomes more and more introspective. At the end, the reader sees her talking cheerfully to her old friend Shoned, but something in her has definitely been broken. I quote, "Ellie's health had improved, and in many ways there was about her a quiet happiness, often a deep tenderness, but it seemed to have no center, no core." And one of the symbols which is very important in Butcher's Broom is the earth. In the novel, there is a strong connection between the earth and femininity. This appears, for example, in the description of a landscape with unmistakably feminine attributes. I quote, "A smooth shape of slender flanks and fluent spinal ridges, of swelling breasts and wandering arms, brown-skinned except where the region of its fertility lies softly grey-green with grass. Here men and women are at work, concerned forever, too, with fertility in that place and in themselves, turning the earth over and sowing grain seed in it, harvesting and rearing flocks and herds, making love in youth and storytelling in old age, with the music distilled out of it, all as singular and memoried as dark brown honey." This association is used to describe a civilization which has developed by working with the earth in perfect harmony with it. The identification of the novel's main woman character, Dark Mary, with the earth takes place using metaphors like a stone, a bit of the earth, or an earth outcrop. This metaphor can be applied to Mary because of her physical appearance. She's dark, small, and upright. Her character, hard and unemotional. And her occupation, she collects herbs and pebbles. Furthermore, the community of the Riascan and the earth are linked together by the person of Mary. I quote, "It was no fantasy that gathered the Riascan in Mary's brow or set Mary wandering for the roots and lichens of color in the brow of the Riascan." Mary is described as a woman in complete harmony and understanding with the earth. Last quotation. The human mother carrying on her ancient solitary business with the earth, talking good and familiar sense with boulder and flower and rock, and now and then following a route below the surface. In easy accord, the communion sensible and so full of natural understanding, that silence might extend into eternal silence, for wind and sun to play upon. And the other symbol I choose is the linnet, a small bird. This bird is the symbol of nature's beauty and perfection, a nature human beings are still a part of. In the following passage, all this perfection is contained in the linnet's beak. The linnet let out a note or two and hopped, trilled and steadied. The twin beers, when they opened, were like the husks of an oat. How delicate, how frail. But this frailty was irradiated with light, almost transparent, when turned with its song to the sun. The old man's eyes gathered light and a touch of that cunning pleasure which may sometimes be seen in the glance of a craftsman. His eyes, too, seemed to have dwindled and got rounder with the years. And somehow there was all at once a greater kinship between him and the caged bird than between him and his kind. This passage describes something like an epiphany experienced by an old man called Old Angus and witnessed by his granddaughter Kirstine. When the bird in his cage starts to sing, there is a transfer of light from the sun into its beak. The singing appears as a miracle. The pleasure in the man's eyes is the result of the delight he is experiencing. This ends with a physical identification of man and bird. Symbolically, the bird is killed when the clearances take place. I quote, "They threw my cage with a cock linnet right into the heart of the flames," said Angus. Many a time he sung where he perished. At the same time as the bird, the people's traditional way of life and spiritual universe are destroyed. But a bird can be replaced by another one, re-establishing a continuity out of which hope and fun can reappear. And a quote, which is at the end of the book, "Little Colin led Grey Angus to a linnet's nest in that spring of poverty, with its thin, lovely sunlight of hope. It's good," said the old man, "to be out of the cage." So why is Butcher's Broom worth reading? And here I have some quotations which I found on Amazon. The first one is from the book cover. This is among the most moving of Gunn's works and establishes the belief in a transcendent spirituality that would be so dominant in his later work. The second quote is from a man called David. "Anyone who wants to understand the main corpus of Gunn's novels should start here, for the inhumane evictions that we know as the clearances remained at the back of his mind as he wrote of the generations who followed, particularly in the Silver Darlings. Gunn shows how the Highlanders were betrayed by the greed of the Scottish aristocracy, the callousness of Parliament, and by a system of law which was created and enforced by the rich for their own benefit. Betrayed too by the Church, which preached a message of punishment for sin and a humble acquiescence. The general mood of the novel is increasingly somber and tragic, yet amid all their suffering, Gunn's crofters come alive in their painstaking toil, their practical caring for one another, their celebration of life itself. His descriptions of the landscape and the patient suffering of the womenfolk are reminiscent of Hardy at his most powerful, and his heartfelt sympathy for this suffering generation is expressed in prose which rises at times to the level of poetry. And here comes a quotation from Butcher's Broom, a very poetic passage, I think. But the thought coming out from the darkening hillsides and down upon the valley seemed earthly enough, as if indeed the Riascan were contemplating all her children, whose cries and shouts ran along the sky gleam in the winding stream, about the hillocks, down the waves of the ground, and up them and down the cottages, through the birch wood like fingers through hair, growing smaller, lessening, fading out upon the air beyond the hill crests, where God's thought in its inner brightness could not hear them, or hear them as a human ear, the hive murmur of wild bees deep in the earth. And now let's examine the third novel, The Silver Darlings. Here is a summary. This is one of Gunn's most successful and best novels. It has many of his favorite themes: the economic decline of the Highlands, the Highland clearances, a young mother left on her own with a son, a terrible storm at sea in which some men are drowned. It is the early 19th century, shortly after the Battle of Waterloo. Catherine and Tormod are young newlyweds. Tormod is a herring fisherman. Most of the people of the village have been evicted in the Highland clearances and have moved to the coast. The herring fishing industry is just getting started. Tormod and his friends set out fishing one night. However, they are attacked by a British naval ship and press-ganged into the navy. Exit Tormod from the story. Catherine is left to fend for herself and goes to live with Kirsty, a family friend. Jump a short while, where we find that Catherine has a son, Finn. Most of the book is about Finn and the herring fisheries. Catherine naturally has an aversion to the sea and tries as hard as she can to keep Finn from the sea, but eventually she has to relent, and he becomes a fine and brave fisherman with his own boat. We follow Finn through his fishing career, his brave scaling of the cliff to get food and water for his shipmates, how he managed to get his own boat, his fighting and drinking, and all the efforts to find the silver darlings, the herrings. There is also his relationship with Roddy, his mentor and eventually his stepfather, for one of Tormod's shipmates turns up many years later and reports that Tormod died 5 years after their capture, injured in fighting the press gang. Finn has to make his peace with Roddy and his mother. In another theme common to many of Gunn's novels, the complex relationships within the community are what makes this novel one of his finest. Yeah, the main character is Finn. The reader first meets him as a 4-year-old pursuing a white butterfly, and thus trespassing the territorial limits set to him by his mother. In the course of his first adventure, he kills the butterfly and becomes aware of death and guilt. This is followed by a moment spent at the House of Peace, some ruins near the village, where he finds comfort and calm. In his next adventure, he is given a trumpet, which will allow him to ascertain himself in the world of men. Finn is an audacious boy. He becomes a hunter and a fisherman and feels more and more drawn to the sea. And when I'm big, I'll go to sea too and be a skipper. Page 144. During the plague or cholera epidemic, he walks a whole night to get a doctor to save his mother. The plague marks the end of Finn's childhood and Lent period. Afterwards, Finn will have many opportunities to show his outstanding qualities again. Both intellectually, he is the schoolmaster's most promising scholar and could have gone to university, and physically, with his big toe and the one next to it, he could always pick up a stone and throw it farther than any other boy. During his adolescence, he comes into conflict with Roddy and Catherine. Roddy, from the model he had once been, becomes a rival. Finn feels the urge to measure himself against him, which culminates in a fight in Stornoway. He feels estranged from his mother because of a relationship to Roddy. This conflict will extend to the whole world of women, until once a song by a girl in North Uist makes him feel reconciled. I quote, "The effect upon Finn was deep and self-revealing. Love for his mother cried out in him, the love that now understood the withdrawn fatality of the mother." In the novel, Finn gets moved by several girls. His relations to them are typically adolescent, shy and awkward. While he jokes with the girls engaged in fish processing, he needs a lot of time to admit he is in love with Una, the girl he eventually marries. I quote, "Now he saw Una before him, and so clearly that the suppressed excitement, which always bothered him in her presence, got such a hold upon him that he could not think of one clever or cutting thing to say." And the other main character is Finn's mother, Catherine. She's first described as a young, newly married wife, always running and laughing, and violently in love with her husband, Tormod. She has fair hair and brown eyes that are her loveliest feature. Her decision to leave her house after Tormod's disappearance shows her determination and courage. As a young mother, Catherine is very close to her son, Finn. I quote, "There were passages of communion between them, when she felt the very texture and essence of this little boy, who was her son, in moments of indescribable ecstasy." Her appearance does not change much in the novel. I quote, "Catherine was now 38, a fully developed woman, her shoulders rounded and firm, her chest deep, her face more full than it had been in the old days, but with the eyes still large and the mouth red. The texture of her fair skin retained much of the smoothness of youth, of girlhood." On one occasion, finding herself alone in her house, she becomes aware of the passing of time and of the inexorability of death. I quote, "But now the words were not spoken by Ronnie, Tormod's shipmate, but in the dark recesses of her own mind, and they came upon her with a sense of immediate horror. The clear picture was blotted out like a piece of sentiment. Too late for you, Catherine." Her feelings for Roddy are complex. She could not read Roddy. She had no certainty about him. Their first coming together as lovers sets in both of them the restrained passion free. The last quote, "Yes, Catherine." His voice was laughing gentle, thick with breath, terrible. In the crush of his arms, she felt herself fainting, and lifted her hands and gripped him behind the neck. And I've picked out two symbols. The first one is the House of Peace. These ruins of an old monastery are associated with Finn's evolution. As his visits to the House of Peace coincide with different stages of his growing up. He first goes there after having chased the butterfly. He passes it while hunting a rabbit with his friend Donny. He takes a rest in it during the episode of the plague. And later when his love for Una leaves him restless. He once pays it a drunk, impious visit, and comes back another time before going to sea to wash out the shame of the previous visit. He returns to it when he's about to receive his new boat, but has not yet come to terms with Una. And finally, on the eve of his wedding, running away from his joking, conspiring companions. Each visit has the same soothing and revitalizing effect upon him. I quote, "This was relief, and in a few moments he came into the core of himself, where he was alone, and felt strangely companioned, not by anyone or anything, but by himself. The rejected self found refuge here, not a coward refuge, but somehow a wandering ease, as if it were indestructible, and had its own final pride, its own secret eyes." The House of Peace is where Finn comes to terms with himself, where his body and spirit are restored, where his self is ascertained. It is the place where he experiences his epiphanies, his moments of delight. Another quote, "And in fact there was one thing of which he could involuntarily catch a queer glimpse. It was the vision he had had in form and color, especially in green, a brightness of soft green, when, after hunting the butterfly, he had fallen asleep, and then, in that lost moment of awakening, did not recognize this place, but saw it as another world." And the other symbol is, or are, the silver darlings. This affectionate term for the herrings, which superstition forbids the fishermen to call by their name, recurs throughout the novel. The fish are much more than potential food. During the first hunt for the silver darlings, chapter 4, the herrings appear as a miracle because of their abundance, their glittering aspect of precious metal, and their graceful movements. I quote, "It's herring, boys, herring, herring." The net was so full of herring that it had pulled the floats under the surface, all except the end buoy, which was half submerged. They forgot all about the ship. They forgot everything except the herrings, the little silver fish, the swift flashing ones, hundreds and thousands of them, the silver darlings. Soon the name is in all people's mouths, and they also see its economic equivalent. Creels of silver herring will turn into creels of silver crowns, became the joke that never lost its gleam. And the silver darlings finally appear in a vision Finn has on his new boat, preceding his stroke of luck. He has sailed farther west than all other fishermen, passing Una's cottage and daydreaming about her, when he experiences the following. I quote, "He was brought back to his normal self, however, by a curious phenomenon, which his eyes had been staring at without consciously seeing. It was a light patch of glassy light on the dark sea. To his staring eyes, it was like a window let into the blackness of the water. Not that in form it was square. On the contrary, it was irregular, but rounded too, into a clearly defined shape. It was when this shape took the likeness of a woman's head and shoulders that Finn was wakened by the finger of wonder. And this shape was, of course, herring. And here in this quotation, the two components of Finn's future, his private life with Una and his professional life as a fisherman, are merged. So why should you read The Silver Darlings? And here a few quotations which I found on goodreads.com. First and foremost, it's one of those lovely warm stories to become immersed in, unworried about its cleverness or literary wit. Gunn, cinematic in his descriptive powers, acutely penetrating in his observations of psychological relationships, and with a belly full of fire to locate human injustice in a broad context of the tradition of tragedy, pulls off the trick of making these realisms subordinate to an unstated but hauntingly real elsewhere. It is a powerfully skippered narrative, or series of narratives, journeys, clear-cut in their cartography. Another quote, "The book is beautifully written, full of the rhythms of the language of northeastern Scotland. Also a great deal of insight into the relationships between the various characters. It is a coming-of-age novel, not just in terms of Finn as an individual, but for the communities that are developing the new industry of herring fishing, as a way to secure themselves a brighter future." Another quote, "Silver Darlings is crammed with not only authentic descriptions of life at sea, but also engaging chapters about village life, a country fair, a perilous voyage, the brave climb for water, and anecdotes about the fishing trade and professions. Silver Darlings is a book about man against the sea, man versus his environment, man versus nature, man versus man, cruel landlords, greed, compulsory naval recruitment. But it is also a book about tenacity, the beauty of the world around us, sheer holding on in the face of adversity and hope." And the last quote, "A wonderful portrait of a community changing from crofters to fishermen, overcoming the scars of the clearances and the hardship of their daily lives, but also the best depiction I've ever read of a boy's feelings as he grows up." So now let's come to the conclusions of my master's thesis, or some of them. Characters are defined as individuals, as members of a community, and also as archetypes. For example, the hero, the wise old man, the mother, the lovers of legend, the boy. The definition of characters as archetypes is made through occasional glimpses, mostly by the characters themselves. Symbolism is omnipresent in the three novels and is used for characterization. The novel's characters are aware of the symbols and their meaning, and their personality is revealed through their reactions to them. Symbolism is a structural element which unifies the different parts of each novel and punctuates the different moments of the plots. The symbols Gunn uses are mostly drawn from man's collective unconscious and derived from nature, the sun, the earth, stones, trees, and animals. They suggest a world beyond the visible one. Gunn looks for the continuity between the earliest times of humanity and the moment of writing. He finds these regenerating values by looking into the past. In Gunn's novels, a man should be able to find himself as an individual and to become a fully integrated part of a community, for example, by participating in a ceilidh. These are the two conditions for achieving self-realization. Gunn's philosophy is made of individualism, respect for tradition, and the recognition of a bond between man and nature. Writing in an age of pessimism, he was optimistic, believing that modern man could be saved if he looked inside himself. So now we've come to the end of my presentation. So I think I will end.
Very much.